Hello, everyone, and welcome to this discussion of research on police responses to intimate partner violence. The term intimate partner violence refers to abuse or aggression that occurs between current or former spouses and dating partners. It falls under the broader category of domestic violence, which also involves violence against children, parents, or the elderly. In the early 1980s, Lawrence Sherman and Richard Burke conducted a very bold field experiment that required the cooperation of the Minneapolis Police Department. The results received considerable public attention and led to a dramatic shift in how police departments across the country respond to intimate partner violence. Prior to the early 1980s, police officers typically did one of three things: negotiated or talked out the dispute with the couples. The second was threaten them, such as "don't make me come back here," or the third was ask one of the couples to leave the premises for a while. Officers arrested people only on very rare occasions, partly because of the Sherman and Burke study. The percentage of urban police departments that made arrests the preferred response to complaints of intimate partner violence rose from 10% in 1984 to 90% in 1988. Let's put this experiment into perspective, take a look at how it was conducted, and examine the controversy it generated. Sherman and Burke acknowledged two different bodies of thought concerning how offenders might respond if arrested for intimate partner violence. First, they recognized that a labeling process might influence the offender. Once the offender receives a deviant label by undergoing arrest, other people treat the offender as a deviant, and he or she is then more likely to act in a way that is consistent with the label of deviant. Ironically, the act of punishment stimulates more of the very behavior it was intended to eliminate. This theory suggests that persons arrested for domestic assault are more likely to recidivate, which means reoffend, than are those not punished. Second, they recognized a different possibility based on the broad rational choice perspective, which assumes that practical cost-benefit calculations guide people's behaviors. Deterrence theory, derived from rational choice perspective, states that the arrested abuser will be less likely to recidivate if faced with swift, severe, and certain punishment, because the cost of reoffending outweighs the benefit of controlling the partner through abuse. The research design called for police officers to respond randomly in one of three ways after receiving a complaint of domestic abuse from the dispatcher. One was to arresting the offender, two, having the offender leave the premises, or three, offering the offender advice or mediation. Each officer carried a police report pad with the intervention listed at the top of each police report form. The assigned intervention governed the police officer's actions. In addition, there was to be a 6-month follow-up period to measure the frequency and seriousness of domestic violence after each police intervention. I should mention that the research design only applied to misdemeanor domestic assault cases. The research design excluded cases of life-threatening or severe injury, usually labeled as aggravated assault. Why did the researchers randomize the treatment? They randomized the treatment to maintain internal validity, which in this case means that any differences in recidivism observed across the three groups relate to the type of police intervention and not to be confused with other factors, for example, the age, race, or marital status of the offender. If officers had not randomly carried out the treatment, they might decide to arrest certain types of people and not others. Randomization puts individuals into homogeneous groups, that is, having similar traits, so that we can distinguish the effect of the treatment from other possible influences. Sherman and Burke took steps to enhance internal validity. They had members of the research staff ride along with officers to monitor whether they followed the randomized intervention procedure. More troubling to Sherman and Burke than the possible threats to the internal validity of the results were the threats to external validity, defined as the extent that you can apply the findings of a study to a broader context, for example, to other situations people, or settings. Sherman and Burke made it explicit that police departments operate differently. To cite just one example, some jurisdictions detain arrested suspects in jail for a few hours, others keep them a few days. The time spent in jail after an arrest represents a factor external to the experiment that might matter in terms of recidivism. After nearly 18 months of examining more than 300 domestic assault cases, Sherman and Burke found support for deterrence theory. The offenders randomly assigned to arrest for domestic violence were significantly less likely to recidivate than offenders not randomly assigned to be arrested for the offense. Lawrence Sherman ambitiously announced the results of the research through televised documentaries, articles in widely read magazines such as the Wall Street Journal, and many different press releases. Researchers soon began replicating the Sherman and Burke study in other areas of the country. While arrests lowered recidivism in some cities, in other cities, arrests surprisingly increased recidivism. By that time, many police departments had already converted to arrest as the preferred response to intimate partner violence. The Sherman and Burke study raises an important question. When should researchers publicize results that can possibly influence public policy? There are opposing sides to this question. Some critics have attacked publicized social research as being too flawed or limited to serve as a reliable guide to policy decision making, and that widespread publication be put on hold, at least until replications are completed. Others argue that publicity can encourage replication of research at other sites and thus improve the knowledge base for policy recommendations. What motivated Lawrence Sherman? The desire for police departments to adopt the findings of his particular research and to begin arresting domestic violence offenders? Or the desire for police departments to become more willing to conduct replications and randomized experiments in general? Perhaps the biggest lesson learned from the Sherman and Burke study is our responsibility as consumers of information to consult and understand primary sources, that is, the original published research, when confronted with important decisions. We should not just depend or rely on information mediated to us through websites or organizations that might have political agendas or simply may have overlooked critical information. Some scholars believe the Sherman and Burke study, published in 1984, represents one of the most important social science articles of the 20th century. It motivated many police departments to switch from experience-based to evidence-based policing. It also stirred a great deal of debate about research publicity and public policy. If you want to know more about the Sherman and Burke study, you can read their 1984 article for free using most any search engine on the web.